Fear comes from uncertainty. When we are absolutely certain, whether of our worth or worthlessness, we are almost impervious to fear. Thus, a feeling of utter unworthiness can be a source of courage.
Hi, my name is Lenja Slierendrecht and you are listening to Studium Generale, the podcast. No man ever steps in the same river twice is a famous aphorism by the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus. Aphorisms, inspirational quotes and mottos often contain a certain truth that is universally understood. But why are they so popular? Is it possible to create aphorisms, or do quotes often turn out to be catchy in retrospect? Dr. Jamie van der Klaauw is a political philosopher who engages in a wide range of topics such as conspiracy theories, film, and different layers of politics from local to international. In this podcast, he will introduce the obscure writer and dock worker Eric Hoffer, who wrote The Passionate State of Mind, full of aphorisms. Enjoy!
I want to shortly ruminate on, or discuss even, several aphorisms by an autodidactic philosopher, Eric Hoffer, a strange figure whose past is not totally clear, who read and wrote on his own, and only later in life got a university position, but never an education. I will discuss him later, but first, let me quickly say something about aphorisms. Winston Churchill supposedly once said that it is good for an uneducated man to read books of quotations. Churchill seems to think here that aphorisms or quotations are not as fruitful as reading or writing entire books. Although we can perhaps sympathize with the sentiment, the danger lies in setting high expectations for yourself, trying to read entire works rather than promoting any kind of contact you can have with thoughts, with good writing, or in my case, with philosophy. Luckily, and ironically, Churchill himself has a book of quotations, and another says, if you cannot read all your books, at any rate handle, or as it were, fondle them, peer into them, let them fall open where they will, read from the first sentence that arrests the eye, set them back on the shelves with your own hands, arrange them on your own plan, so that if you do not know what is in them, you at least know where they are. Indeed, it is better to read a little than not read at all, and it is better to stimulate your reading rather than let it be blocked by your own expectations of what reading should be, or how much you should have read. Stimulating reading is about the seduction of words, sentences, and ideas, of opening yourself up to the curiosity of wanting to read on. What better vehicle is there than a book of aphorisms then? Aphorisms, more so than quotations, are sentences that contain their whole message or truth in themselves. They gave a more immediate reward for reading on, for absorbing and processing thoughts in tiny bites. Quotations often come from larger writings, speeches, or performances, but aphorisms are thought of and written for their isolated consumption. Coming from the Greek, aphorism can be translated as a delimitation, distinction, and definition. In other words, we can understand it today as a short and memorable sentence or expression of a general truth or principle. Not quite the same as the more general saying or adage, as it is more unique and personal, but still retaining a more general wisdom, something we can transmit and understand. Aphorisms have been part of philosophy since its beginnings. The very first thinkers identified in ancient Greece often wrote or were remembered through aphorisms, such as Heraclitus, who once said that no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man. And even in the 20th century, we find brilliant works of aphorisms, such as Theodor Adorno's Minima Moralia, a powerhouse of a book that is made up of Adorno's fragmented writings and recollections during the Second World War. Every piece of thought is accompanied by a short interpretation, by an explanation which often contains even more aphorisms. Adorno thinks about art, common sayings, different languages, and much more. Examples of playful titles, often with a twist, include All Rights Reserved, They, the People, and Final Clarity. But let's now shift to a much lesser-known book called The Passionate State of Mind, written by the autodidactic, former longshoreman, that is a dock worker, Eric Hoffer. And before we go through a selection of aphorisms from the book, let me shortly introduce the man himself. Short, because we don't really know that much about him. So, who was Eric Hoffer? Eric Hoffer was born in 1902, although we do not know where exactly. He claims to have been born in the Bronx to parents from an Alsatian background. But he has no New York accent, and his German sounds more Bavarian than Alsatian. By age 5, or so he claims, Hoffer could already read in both English and his parents' native German. In an unfortunate accident, he lost his sight at the age of 7, partly because his mother had died due to falling from a flight of stairs. So it was a traumatic experience rather than a physical problem. He spoke with a German accent all his life, even though he spoke English fluently. Supposedly, he was raised by a German immigrant named Martha. His eyesight inexplicably returned when he was 15. He recalls that this is the time he feared he would lose his eyesight again, and therefore started reading feverishly, making it a lifelong habit. Hoffer had also lost his father at a young age. Hence, the union his father was a part of paid for the funeral and left him about $300 in insurance money. Hoffer used the money to take a bus to Los Angeles and spent the next 10 years wandering, as he remembered, up and down the land, dodging hunger and grieving over the world. He ends up on the infamous center of tramps, vagabonds, and hobos, Skid Row, reading, occasionally writing, and working at odd jobs. After battling with suicidal thoughts, he left Skid Row and became a migrant worker for a while, dividing his time, in his own words, between the books and the brothels. He read the essays by Michel de Montaigne, which would become a lifelong reference point. He wrote a novel, 4 Years in Young Hank's Life, and a novella, Chance and Mr. Kuntz, both partly autobiographical. But these weren't his real breakthroughs. When he was around 40 years old, the time of the Second World War, he began to work as a longshoreman on the docks of San Francisco. And here he began to write seriously, and seriously much. He would spend about 20 years on the docks, writing his breakthrough book, The True Believer, which was published in 1951, and what he considers his best work, The Ordeal of Change, in 1963. During this time, he would work in the day and write in the evening. The conversations and experiences he had, both as a human being who had to work and as a fellow worker who would discuss and experience life collectively, served as the grounds for his philosophical understandings. He once said that my writing is done in railroad yards while waiting for a freight, in the fields while waiting for a truck, and at noon after lunch. Towns are too distracting. Because, and I quote again, my writing grows out of my life just as a branch from a tree. After the success of The Ordeal of Change, Hoffer left the docks in 1964 and shortly after became an adjunct professor at the University of California, Berkeley, although he decides to retire from public life not much later in 1970. He remarked then, I'm going to crawl back into my hole where I started. I don't want to be a public person or anybody's spokesman. Any man can ride a train. Only a wise man knows when to get off. He died in his home in San Francisco in 1983 at the age of 80. When he was called an intellectual, he insisted that he simply was a longshoreman. In a true synthesis, then, Hoffer came to be known as the longshoreman philosopher. So, to adjust Churchill's famous saying that it is good for an uneducated man to read books of quotations, we can say it is even better for an uneducated man to write a book of quotations. And now I will read a selection of aphorisms from The Passionate State of Mind, 11 to be precise. Aphorism 1. The times of drastic change are times of passion. We can never be fit and ready for that which is wholly new. We have to adjust ourselves, and every radical adjustment is a crisis in self-esteem. We undergo a test. We have to prove ourselves. A population subjected to drastic change is thus a population of misfits, and misfits live and breathe in an atmosphere of passion. Second aphorism. There is perhaps no better way of measuring the natural endowment of a soul than by its ability to transmute dissatisfaction into a creative impulse. The genuine artist is as much a dissatisfied person as the revolutionary. Yet how diametrically opposed are the products each distills from his dissatisfaction. Aphorism 3. A social order is stable so long as it can give scope to talent and youth. Youth itself is a talent, a perishable talent. Aphorism 4. To act or think extremely, one needs a sense of the dramatic. Excesses are essentially gestures. It is easy to be extremely cruel, magnanimous, humble, or self-sacrificing when we see ourselves actors in a performance. Aphorism 5. If what we profess is not an organic part of our understanding, we are likely to profess it with vehemence and intolerance. Intolerance is the do not touch sign on something that cannot bear touching. We do not mind having our hair ruffled, but we will not tolerate any familiarity with the toupee which covers our baldness. Aphorism 6. We often use strong language not to express a powerful emotion or conviction, but to invoke it in us. It is not only other people's words that can rouse feeling in us. We can talk ourselves into a rage or an enthusiasm. Aphorism 7. Fear comes from uncertainty. When we are absolutely certain, whether of our worth or worthlessness, we are almost impervious to fear. Thus, a feeling of utter unworthiness can be a source of courage. Aphorism 8. Considering how light-hearted we feel when we do not take ourselves seriously, it is surprising how difficult the attainment of this sensible and practical attitude seems to be. It is apparently much easier to be serious than frivolous. Aphorism 9. Man's being is neither profound nor sublime. To search for something deep underneath the surface in order to explain human phenomena is to discard the nutritious outer layer for a non-existent core. Like a bulb, man is all skin and no kernel. Aphorism 10. There is perhaps in all misfits a powerful secret craving to turn the whole of humanity into misfits. Hence, partly their passionate advocacy of a drastically new social order. For we are all misfits when we have to adjust ourselves to the wholly new. And finally, Aphorism 11. the best reason for loving others is still that they love us.
Thank you for listening. Interested in more? Join one of our Studium Generale live events. Our calendar can be found on our website, or listen to other podcasts through Spotify or YouTube.